Get that woman away from my daughter immediately. Alexander Blackwood's voice thundered through the marble halls of Elysium Estate like a cannon blast. All movement ceased in the sprawling mansion's east wing as staff froze in place, eyes darting toward the source of the commotion. In the center of the music room stood Elena Vasquez, 32, an immigrant from Venezuela with warm brown eyes and calloused hands. She had been kneeling beside 9-year-old Sophia Blackwood, the billionaire's daughter who hadn't spoken a word since the tragic yacht accident that claimed her mother's life 18 months ago. The piano bench where they sat was littered with colorful musical notation cards. Sophia, who moments earlier had been rocking violently and covering her ears, now sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on Elena's hands as they formed shapes in the air, conducting an invisible orchestra. "Mr. Blackwood, please." Mrs. Winters, the head housekeeper, stepped forward nervously. Miss Vasquez was only trying to... I don't care what she was trying to do. Alexander cut her off, adjusting his custom Armani suit as he strode across the room. At 45, the tech mogul and founder of Blackwood Innovations carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to absolute control. "No one touches my daughter without my explicit permission, especially not unauthorized therapy techniques." The staff knew Alexander Blackwood as a man transformed by grief. Once celebrated in Silicon Valley for his visionary leadership and philanthropy, he had retreated into a fortress of wealth and isolation after losing his wife, Claire. His company now ran on autopilot, while he obsessively focused on finding a cure for his daughter's selective mutism, cycling through world-renowned specialists like disposable commodities. Sophia sat motionless at the piano, her delicate fingers hovering over the keys she once played with prodigious skill. Before the accident, she had been a musical savant, performing Chopin at age 6. Now, the piano remained untouched, a monument to what was lost. Elena Vasquez had joined the household staff just 3 weeks ago. Officially hired as an assistant housekeeper, she had quickly formed a connection with Sophia, often finding the girl hiding in the library or gardens when she should have been with her tutors. What Alexander Blackwood didn't know, what nobody in the mansion knew, was that Elena Vasquez was not who she claimed to be. Her employment credentials were flawless forgeries. Her presence at Elysium Estate was no accident. "I apologize, Mr. Blackwood," Elena said, rising slowly, dignity evident in her posture despite her simple uniform. Sophia was experiencing sensory overload. "I was using melodic intonation therapy to help regulate her nervous system." Alexander's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "And where exactly does a housekeeper learn about melodic intonation therapy?" Before Elena could answer, something extraordinary happened. Sophia's hand reached out, grasping Elena's wrist. The child, who had not made deliberate physical contact with anyone since the accident, was now clinging to the housekeeper. More astonishing still, Sophia's lips parted, and a single, perfect musical note emerged, a middle C, sustained and clear. The room fell into stunned silence. "That's impossible," whispered Dr. Reynolds, the neuropsychologist who had been observing from the doorway. "We've tried every approved therapeutic approach." Alexander staggered slightly, gripping the edge of the grand piano for support. "Sophia," he whispered. The child didn't speak again, but her eyes remained fixed on Elena, who stood perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might break the spell. "Everyone out," Alexander commanded, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "Except you, Ms. Vasquez, and Dr. Reynolds, please stay." As the room cleared, Alexander studied the woman who had somehow reached his daughter when teams of specialists had failed. "Who are you, really?" he asked. "And don't insult my intelligence with the housekeeper story. No domestic staff knows specialized neurological therapy techniques." Elena straightened her shoulders. "My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez. I have a PhD in music therapy and neuroscience from Stanford." And I'm here because your research division at Blackwood Innovations is conducting experimental treatments on children like Sophia without proper ethical oversight. Alexander's private office resembled a war room. Screens displayed Sophia's medical data, brain scans, and treatment protocols. Elena stood before him, no longer in her housekeeper's uniform, but in clothes brought to her by Mrs. Winters, a simple blouse and slacks that somehow made her look more formidable. Project Orpheus, Elena said, pointing to a file on his desk. Named after the musician who tried to rescue his wife from the underworld. Poetic, considering your circumstances. Alexander's face remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped his chair. You've been investigating me. Not you. Your research division. Specifically, the work of Dr. Victor Mercer. At the mention of this name, Dr. Reynolds visibly tensed. Mr. Blackwood, perhaps we should discuss this privately. 18 months ago, Elena continued, undeterred, my brother Miguel was enrolled in an experimental program at the Blackwood Neurological Institute. He was 11. Diagnosed with selective mutism following trauma. The program promised breakthrough results using a proprietary neural stimulation technique. She pulled out her phone, showing Alexander a photo of a smiling boy with her same warm eyes. Miguel suffered a massive seizure during treatment. He's been in a vegetative state ever since. When I investigated, I discovered 7 other cases with similar adverse outcomes, all buried under confidentiality agreements and legal settlements. Alexander's expression darkened. If you're implying that I would knowingly harm children, I'm stating that your company is conducting dangerous experimental treatments while you're too consumed by grief to provide proper oversight. And now they've convinced you to try the same protocol on your own daughter. Dr. Reynolds stepped forward. Mr. Blackwood, Dr. Vasquez is clearly disturbed. Her allegations are baseless. Then explain this, Elena interrupted, sliding a tablet across the desk. On it was an internal memo from Blackwood Innovations' legal department discussing containment strategies for Orpheus adverse events and special protocols for the Sophia application. Alexander stared at the document, the blood draining from his face. This is dated 3 months ago. I never authorized. You did, Elena said quietly. Along with hundreds of other documents you've signed without reading since your wife's death. Dr. Mercer has been running Orpheus with minimal oversight, using your grief as cover. Alexander turned to Dr. Reynolds, whose expression had shifted from indignation to calculation. Is this true? Alexander demanded. The treatments are experimental, yes, Reynolds admitted carefully. But the potential benefits far outweigh the risks. Sophia could regain her voice, her music. At what cost? Elena interjected. The neural pathways being stimulated are fundamental to identity formation and emotional regulation. You're not just trying to make these children speak, you're rewiring who they are. Alexander's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Victor Mercer. He stared at it for a long moment before declining. Why come here as a housekeeper? Alexander finally asked Elena. Why not go to the authorities? Elena's expression hardened. I tried. Your company's legal team buried my complaints under mountains of paperwork, so I decided to gather evidence from the inside and protect Sophia in the process. As if summoned by her name, the door to the office opened. Sophia stood there, clutching one of the musical notation cards from earlier. She walked directly to Elena and placed it in her hand. It was the notation for middle C, the note she had sung. The next 48 hours transformed Elysium Estate into a fortress under siege. Alexander, now fully awakened to the danger, had dismissed Dr. Reynolds and placed the entire household on high alert. Security teams patrolled the grounds while Alexander's personal lawyer worked to unravel the extent of Project Orpheus. Elena had been installed in a guest suite, no longer pretending to be staff, but serving as Sophia's primary caregiver. The connection between them had deepened, with Sophia now producing not just single notes, but short melodic phrases, not words, but music that somehow conveyed meaning Elena seemed uniquely able to interpret. "She's creating her own language," Elena explained, as Alexander watched them work together in the music room. "Music is how she's finding her way back." Alexander observed with a mixture of hope and suspicion. Part of him still questioned Elena's motives, wondering if this miraculous progress was somehow manufactured to gain his trust. His phone rang again, Victor Mercer, for the 12th time that day. "You should talk to him," Elena said, surprising him. "Record the conversation. Give him enough rope to hang himself." When Alexander finally answered, Mercer's voice was tightly controlled. "Alexander, we need to discuss the Vasquez situation immediately. She's a disturbed individual with a personal vendetta against our work." "What exactly is our work, Victor?" Alexander asked coldly. "Because I'm looking at files showing experimental protocols I never approved being used on vulnerable children. Those treatments represent the cutting edge of neuroscience." Mercer replied smoothly. "Yes, there have been setbacks, but we're on the verge of a breakthrough that could help Sophia and countless others." "Setbacks?" Alexander's voice rose. "You call what happened to Miguel Vasquez a setback?" A pause. "The Vasquez case was unfortunate, but statistically within acceptable risk parameters for experimental treatment." "And was my daughter within those acceptable risk parameters too?" Another pause, longer this time. "Alexander, you need to understand the bigger picture. Blackwood Innovations stands to revolutionize neurological treatment. The market potential is—" "Market potential," Alexander repeated, disgust evident in his voice. "My daughter isn't a market opportunity, Victor." "Don't be naive," Mercer's voice hardened. "You approved this direction yourself. The board is fully behind the Orpheus initiative. If you're having second thoughts now, perhaps it's time to discuss your fitness to continue leading the company." The threat hung in the air, clear and unmistakable. 3 days later, the Blackwood Innovations Board of Directors convened for an emergency session. The gleaming conference room on the 52nd floor of Blackwood Tower hummed with tension as Alexander entered, flanked by his legal team. Victor Mercer sat at the far end, surrounded by his own allies. His confident smile suggested he believed the outcome was predetermined. "I've called this meeting," Alexander began, "to address serious ethical violations within our neurological research division." "Before we proceed," interrupted Mercer, "I believe the board should consider whether Mr. Blackwood's personal circumstances have compromised his judgment. His recent erratic behavior—" "My behavior?" Alexander's laugh was cold. "Let's talk about behavior, Victor." With a nod to his assistant, the room darkened and a projection appeared on the wall. Medical files, internal memos, and video footage began to play. Children in distress during experimental treatments, doctors expressing concerns that were subsequently dismissed. Legal strategies to silence families. 8 children have suffered severe neurological damage under Project Orpheus, Alexander stated. 8 families were paid to keep quiet while the program continued unchanged. The board members shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. "These are selective representations," Mercer countered smoothly. "The full dataset shows promising results that far outweigh isolated incidents." Isolated incidents? A new voice entered the conversation as the conference room doors opened. Elena Vasquez walked in, followed by 7 sets of parents, each carrying photos of their children. Behind them came news cameras, live streaming the confrontation to millions. "These are not isolated incidents," Elena continued, her voice steady. "These are children whose lives were destroyed by experiments conducted without proper informed consent." Mercer's face contorted with rage. "This is a private board meeting. Security." "Actually," Alexander said calmly, "I invited them. As majority shareholder, that's my prerogative." He turned to address the cameras directly. Today, Blackwood Innovations acknowledges its failure to uphold the ethical standards that should guide all medical research. Project Orpheus is terminated, effective immediately. A fund of $2 billion will be established to provide lifetime care for affected families. Gasps echoed through the room as Alexander continued. Furthermore, I am stepping down as CEO to focus on restructuring our research division with proper ethical oversight. And to focus on what matters most, my daughter. As security escorted a protesting Mercer from the room, Alexander approached the parents who had come forward. I can't undo the harm that's been done, he said quietly. But I promise you this is just the beginning of making things right. 1 year later, the grounds of what was once Elysium Estate had been transformed. The imposing gates that once kept the world at bay now stood open, welcoming families to the Blackwood Center for Communicative Arts, a nonprofit residential facility for children with communication disorders. The mansion's music room, where Sophia had first sung her single note, had been expanded into a state-of-the-art music therapy center. Children of all ages filled the space, some playing instruments, others using specialized technology to translate movement into sound. Elena, now the center's director, moved among them with purpose and compassion. Her brother Miguel, while still unable to speak, had shown remarkable responses to the music therapy program she had developed, small victories celebrated by the entire community. Alexander, dressed casually in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, watched from the doorway as Sophia sat at the grand piano. At 10 years old, she still spoke primarily through music, but her compositions had grown increasingly complex and expressive. She's composing a piece for the anniversary celebration, Elena explained, joining him. She calls it Voices Found. The relationship between them had evolved over the months, from suspicion to respect, from collaboration to something deeper neither had fully acknowledged. The new treatment protocol is showing promising results, Alexander said. 3 children have begun speaking again, and the brain scans show none of the concerning patterns we saw with Orpheus. Because we're not forcing them to conform to our definition of communication, Elena replied. We're meeting them where they are. Across the room, Sophia looked up from the piano and smiled at them, a gesture once rare that now came easily. She beckoned them over, pointing excitedly to her composition. It's a duet, Elena translated, reading the notation, for piano and voice. Alexander raised an eyebrow. She wants us to perform it? Together? Sophia nodded emphatically, then did something extraordinary. She spoke, her voice soft but clear. Family plays together. 5 years later, the annual Blackwood Center Gala filled the transformed gardens of the estate. Hundreds of guests, including families, researchers, and supporters, gathered under twinkling lights as a teenage Sophia Blackwood took the stage. At 14, she had grown into a poised young woman whose musical compositions had gained recognition in classical circles. Though she still preferred music to speech in many situations, she now moved confidently between both worlds. Welcome to our 5th anniversary celebration, she said into the microphone, her voice strong and clear. Tonight, I want to share something special with you. She gestured to the side of the stage, where Alexander and Elena joined her, now wearing matching wedding bands. 5 years ago, my father and Elena taught me that communication isn't just about words, it's about being truly heard. Sophia smiled at them both. They also taught me that sometimes, the people who seem most different from us are the ones who help us find our true voice. As the 3 of them took their places at the instruments, Sophia at the piano, Elena with a violin, Alexander with a cello he had learned specifically to play with his daughter, the audience fell silent. The music began softly, tentatively, like a question being asked. Then it grew, each instrument finding its voice in the composition, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in counterpoint, but always in conversation. In the front row, Miguel Vasquez watched from his wheelchair, his hand moving slightly in time with the music, a small movement that would have been missed by many, but that represented a world of progress to those who loved him. As the final notes faded into the night air, Sophia leaned toward the microphone once more. "My mother once told me that music is the space between the notes," she said softly. "I think healing works the same way. It happens in the spaces between our broken pieces, in the silence between our words, in the moments we choose to listen instead of speak." She looked out at the gathered families, some whose children spoke with words, others who communicated through technology, art, or movement. "We all have different voices," Sophia concluded, "but tonight we speak as one." As applause filled the garden, Alexander and Elena embraced their daughter, forming a circle that had once seemed impossible. Three people who had begun as adversaries, now bound together by something stronger than blood, the courage to listen when the world had stopped hearing. In the gentle evening breeze, the music lingered, a reminder that sometimes our deepest wounds become doorways to our greatest purpose, and that true healing begins when we find the courage to hear the voices silenced by our fear.